In a courtroom where power once silenced truth, one trial shattered the illusion. A veteran cop accused of brutalizing an unarmed student, a young prosecutor with everything to prove, and a judge who refused to flinch. What unfolded wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning. Stay with us, because this story isn't about headlines. It's about the moment justice stood its ground, and the badge didn't win. The courtroom in Harrison County, Georgia, felt heavier than usual that morning. Not from the weather, but from what was coming, from the eyes that avoided each other, from the silence that buzzed louder than any voice. At the center of it all sat Judge Nadia Caldwell, her expression calm, but far from indifferent. At 48, Judge Caldwell had built a reputation that echoed through every legal circle in the Southeast. Daughter of a Baton Rouge civil rights activist and a public school teacher, she knew injustice not as theory, but as memory. She still remembered the day the police raided her childhood home without a warrant, remembered watching her teenage brother face the barrel of a shotgun for a broken taillight. And she remembered the look on her mother's face, not fear, but fire. She carried that fire into Harvard Law, into years as a public defender, into her time suing cities for unlawful arrests. And now, onto this bench. She had presided over hundreds of difficult cases, but today was different. Because today, Officer Travis Langford stood trial. Langford wasn't just any cop. He was a 30-year decorated veteran of the Atlanta Police Department. Multiple commendations, public praise, community outreach posters with his face on them. But behind the medals was a man with a history one littered with complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and unnecessary stops. None had stuck. Until now. The victim was Elijah Carter, a senior at Georgia Tech, engineering major, no priors. No trouble. Just a young black man walking home from his night class when Langford pulled up behind him. What happened next wasn't a blur. It was on camera. Langford tackled Elijah to the ground, shouting orders over his cries. When Elijah said, "I can't breathe," Langford hit him again, and again. The injuries were severe: 2 broken ribs, a fractured arm, a punctured eardrum. The courtroom was divided. Elijah's family sat in one row, quiet and stiff with grief. Across from them sat several off-duty officers in uniform, backing Langford with their silence. And at the center, Langford himself sitting tall in his uniform, hands folded, chin high. It was an unspoken message: I'm still in control. The prosecutor, Alana Green, rose first, young, brilliant, with a calm voice that masked relentless energy. She presented her opening argument with precision: witnesses, medical records, raw, uncut body cam footage. Everything pointed to Langford's guilt. But the defense was not unprepared. Langford had hired Clive Rourke, a well-known attorney whose specialty was spinning police misconduct into public misunderstanding. He stood before the jury, all charm and sharp tailoring. "We ask you to look at this not through the lens of outrage," he said, "but through the lens of reality. Policing is imperfect. Mistakes happen. But Officer Langford acted on a matching description of a suspect in a nearby robbery. He followed his training." He smiled like he'd already won. But the moment Elijah Carter entered the courtroom, all that fell away. Elijah had to be wheeled in by his mother. One side of his face still bore the trace of swelling. He couldn't move his left hand. When he looked at the jury, it wasn't anger they saw. It was something harder to bear: confusion, pain, and the quiet disbelief that this had actually happened to him. "I did everything I was supposed to," Elijah said. "I stopped. I put my hands up. I told him my name, and he just threw me down." His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. Then came the footage. Judge Caldwell allowed it without hesitation. What played was worse than the transcript. Langford didn't pause, didn't ask questions. He went from 0 to full force in seconds. Elijah begged, tried to explain. Blood spattered the sidewalk. Langford kept hitting until the cries stopped. Even then, Langford didn't look up at the screen, but Judge Caldwell was watching him. The defense tried to counter. Rourke questioned the timeline, accused Elijah of agitated movements, and suggested he might have been reaching for something. Then came a twist. The prosecution called Sergeant Mason Crowley, Langford's former partner. Crowley walked slowly to the stand, his face tight with something between guilt and relief. "I've known Travis for years," he began. "He always said he knew how to handle people, that he could tell who needed a lesson. Sometimes he'd brag after a stop, said it was about dominance, not safety." The gallery tensed. Langford finally turned to look at him. Crowley continued. "I once tried to report it. Internal Affairs said I was imagining things, that it would go away, but it never went away." Langford's composure cracked. He clenched his jaw. His hands balled into fists, but he said nothing. After the witness stepped down, Judge Caldwell called for a short recess. It should have been just another pause. But then the doors opened. 2 men in dark suits entered quietly. Federal agents. They approached the bench. One handed Judge Caldwell a sealed envelope. She opened it, read it, said nothing for a long moment. Then, calmly, she returned to her seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice firm, "there has been a development." She turned to Langford. "Officer Travis Langford, you are hereby remanded to federal custody under charges of obstruction of justice, conspiracy to falsify evidence, and participation in an unlawful communication ring involving racially motivated behavior." The room erupted. Langford stood, stunned. "You can't do this." But the agents were already behind him. They cuffed him silently. He didn't resist. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. The jury sat frozen. Elijah's mother put a hand over her mouth. A camera clicked, then another. Judge Caldwell waited for silence. Then she said, loud and clear, "Let this be heard beyond this courtroom. The law is not a shield for the powerful, and justice does not answer to fear. It answers to truth." Langford was escorted out. The trial would continue. But the message had been sent. Elijah would heal slowly, physically, mentally. He would graduate 6 months later, his diploma framed above his hospital bills. But he would also speak at colleges, at forums, at schools. His voice, once trembling, grew firm, steady. Judge Caldwell returned to her bench each morning, unshaken. Some said she looked tougher, others said she looked tired. But when asked later what she remembered most, she answered simply, the silence when he was cuffed. The sound of power finally losing its echo, and that echo stayed gone. Because in Harrison County, justice didn't flinch. Not that day. Not ever again.